and I want to thank the Children's Museum for hosting us today for this event. I'm Dr. Marilyn Brandt. I'm the director of the Reef Response Coral Restoration Program. That is a program at the University of the Virgin Islands. So I'm a research professor there, where we both study corals and also propagate them for use in coral restoration. So I'm going to talk to you today, just give you a brief introduction to the Reef Response program, and then hand it over to a bunch of the people I work with to show you some really great photographs that were taken by one of our staff members, Dan Mele, who's also his own professional photography company. And then we can open it up for any questions you guys may have. We brought some of the gear that we use to do research and to do coral restoration. So you're welcome to come and talk to people and interact with some of the gear. All right, so thumbs up. Right? Let's give you a thumbs up. Okay, well, if you don't spend much time in the water, you might not know that we have some incredible coral reef ecosystems here in the Virgin Islands. These are two types of different branching corals, so the elkhorn coral and the staghorn coral. Next slide. We also have star coral habitats here, so we have a lot of different reef habitats. The one picture here on the right is one of our deeper reef habitats. So today you'll hear a little bit about our coral restoration work in some of the deeper reefs that are harder to access. Next slide. So, but I first wanted to start with what are corals and why are they even important? So if you're not familiar with what a coral is, the whole reason coral reefs are called corals are called coral reefs is because they are reefs built by corals. So corals are the foundational buildings of the coral reefs, which you can think of as cities. So next slide. So when you look at a coral colony, it is alive. Can anybody tell me if it's a plant or an animal? Except my children. No. Wes. Animal? Yes. But actually, if you said plant, you'd be correct too. So corals are actually a combination of an animal host. So an animal that looks a lot like a jellyfish. So you can see its little tentacles here. And a plant that lives in its tissues. And they live together in what's called a symbiosis. So that means the coral animal provides the plant with a nice home, and the plant photosynthesizes and gives the corals extra nutrients. And got questions? Yes, ma'am? Kind of, yeah, that's a lot. I'm going to let my son give my presentations from now on. So the coral, yes, it is. So the coral is sort of the host. The plant lives there and pays its rent to the coral. And when you look at a coral colony, it's actually a collection of genetically identical, one slide forward, sorry. It's a collection of genetically identical coral polyps, all connected together. So it's really fantastic that these coral reefs, so because the plants are living in the animals, the plants give the corals enough extra nutrients that they can build a skeleton. And so over a lot of years, that skeleton builds the coral reef itself. So that little symbiosis between the plant and the animal, these tiny little animals that are the size of like your pinky finger, over thousands, millions of years builds actual coral reef structures. And in some cases, this means building islands. So coral reefs are, that's why I like them, because corals are like really cool interaction between animals and plants. Hazel. Why do they have what? Why do they have to do that? Well, they just do it. Why do we have to do anything we do? They just live in this environment and they build those reefs. But when they do it, it helps us out. So, okay, next slide. So we know that coral reefs provide a lot. That was a great introduction. Why do they do this? Well, they do it for themselves, but we get a lot of benefits from them. I swear I didn't plant the kids. We know coral reefs is providing homes for fish, so they provide habitat for fisheries, a lot of fish that we like to eat. They're also really, really beautiful, so they draw tourists, and you can get a lot of economic activity from that, money. Next slide. But a lot of people don't realize that because corals are growing offshore, they are also protecting our shorelines. So this is a picture off of Reef Bay over on St. John of the coral reef. So this whole area here is built by those corals over thousands of years. And that structure creates this reef crest. And that reef crest is what protects the shores and creates some of the beaches that we love here. So the corals just doing their little thing out there, just being corals and plants together, growing over all that time, is what protects and creates some of our beaches and shorelines. Thanks. They make this. These are the coral reefs right here. Yeah. All right, next slide. This is another good slide. If you're from St. Croix, this is the shoreline, this is the reef break created by the coral reefs that is actually protecting all of Christiansted. So it created that harbor, that area, and those living corals are what built that. So it's really impressive that these tiny little organisms and that symbiosis between them create so much protection for us. Next slide. But unfortunately, we're losing corals to a lot of different stressors. This is the sad part. So one of the things that's happening right now is we're experiencing really hot temperatures. So there's been marine heat waves, and so the corals are bleaching. So bleaching, when you see these white corals out on the reef, it looks kind of pretty, but that just means the corals are really stressed. So that symbiosis between the plant and the animal, it's gotten too hot, and basically, like Liam said, the landlords kicked their tenants out. They got too hot, so they kicked out the algae. They kicked out the plants. That results in a really stressful state for the corals, and they stop growing, and they stop reproducing. So bleaching, this is called bleaching, and that's one of the major stressors to corals. All right, thanks. Yes, they can get really sick from this too, or they can just die completely from it. All right, next. And then there's all of these other stressors that are happening too. So things like adding extra sediment or pollution, overfishing. So sometimes we take too many of the organisms that keep the coral reef in balance. Next picture. And then also one of the things that my lab studies is coral disease, which is contributing to the decline of coral reefs. Next slide. So that was my depressing slide. So now we're going to talk about a little bit more hope. So that is why we contribute. Hazel, how about we talk at the end? Yeah. So the coral restoration program at the University of the Virgin Islands is called Reef Response. Yeah. Reef Response is actually made up of a whole bunch of people. You're going to hear from some of these folks today, but we have 11 full-time staff, 7 graduate students at the Masters of Marine Environmental Science program at UVI, and 3 undergraduate interns. And occasionally we have volunteers as well. So at Reef Response, we focus on 3 main R's: rescue, research, and restore. And then cross-cutting through those are our outreach and education efforts. Next slide. So for rescue, we go out and we collect what are called fragments of opportunity. So these are frags of op. They're corals that maybe were broken up because of a boat grounding or something like that, or they're removing derelict vessels or sunken ships that corals have grown on. And we will take those corals, so there's some pictures of that around here, and put them into some of our nurseries. So the stars are where we have our in-water nurseries around St. Thomas and St. John, and we grow the corals out there. We also have a land-based coral nursery at the University of the Virgin Islands, so that's where some of our interns and our staff maintain some of the corals. Different types of corals like different things. Some corals really just have to stay in the ocean. Some corals really like the spa of the land-based nursery where we take care of them and we feed them every day. And then the red dots represent where we're actually planting corals, where we're out planting corals. Next slide. So for research, we're obviously at UVI, so we're an academic institution, so we do lots of research, testing different ways of planting the corals, testing, monitoring the corals, and then we also do a lot of research on how the community wants to be engaged with coral restoration and how the community can help with coral restoration. Next slide. And then restore, that's what we really want to do, and that's outplanting. So we take the corals that we grow in the nurseries, and we actually take them out and we attach them to the reef with things like epoxy or cement, sometimes even cable ties or nails. So we do like a lot of construction work in this effort. Awesome. So this is a picture of, I think this is Nick, right? Yeah, Nick's here.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, yeah. Cleaning the substrate, like basically cleaning the reef before planting the corals onto the reef. Right, next slide. And then, as I mentioned, we do a lot of education outreach. Like today, we do events. We try to share what we learn. We train interns. We have a website. Next slide. And we have a booklet that we try to release every year, but we get really busy, so we haven't been doing a good job with that. But we have a few copies of this. It's older. We're going to have a new version come out. This is called the Coral Chronicles, which is kind of like our newsletter. And next slide. And how do we keep this going? Well, we have a lot of funding from different places, including the National Science Foundation, NOAA. Some local foundations have donated to us also, and that really keeps us going. And then next slide is the thank you slide from me, because now I'm going to turn it over to the people who you really want to hear from, which are the staff of Reef Response and Dan Mele, who took all of these incredible photographs. So, Dan, you're up.
Thanks, Marilyn. Thanks, everybody, for coming. How many have seen an underwater camera like this before? Pretty crazy, right? A few of you have, right? Because I take all y'all's pictures. Well, I'm the photographer here, so these are all my photos that document the work that Reef Response does. I'm also a biologist as well, so some days I'm actually taking part in the research as well. But this is what I use to take all these pictures. It looks like this crazy contraption, but inside there fits that little camera that Marilyn, you can actually hold it up. That little camera right there fits inside this big thing right here. And after the presentation, I can show you guys how that works and pressurize it and all that kind of stuff. So I'm an underwater photographer. So my goal is to really like take things that are happening in the water that most people don't get to see and bring it to the surface, right? Kind of like this super cool underwater robot. How many people have seen an underwater robot before? A couple people, all right, the UVI people. But we have robots underwater that go around and like look at the reef and learn about it, so it's pretty cool. Next slide. But the reason why I really like to photograph underwater is because, you know, there's so much cool stuff that we do under there that's kind of similar to work that you do on land, right? But it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So we're building stuff, we're using power tools, we're doing all kinds of cool things in the water that it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. But this is your backyard. So this is at Lavongo Key, which is an island between St. Thomas and St. John. And these are some of our divers that are constructing a nursery out of rebar. So we welded this on land, and then our divers bring it underwater and assemble it. So it spells out Lavongo. That's what it says. And you can see this is what it looks like. So some of you have probably used a sledgehammer before, but probably not many of you have used one while scuba diving. So we get all in our dive gear, everybody's weighted down, and we're literally sledging this thing into the water to build our nursery. And then who knew you could use power tools under the water? So you wouldn't bring like these guys do, of course. But we have angle grinders that are meant to go underwater. So we're cutting through rebar and building our nurseries. and using all these really cool tools, but doing it all on scuba. And then also another one that we always get asked about when people see us with our clipboards is, how do you guys write underwater? Well, we just use the normal pencils that you guys use in your classroom, but we just have special paper that's, I don't know, what's it made of? It's basically a plastic paper that you can write on underwater. So this is how we take data underwater, just like how you guys would write a report in your classroom. But it's also important to photograph some of the bad things that happen on coral reefs. So Marilyn mentioned bleaching and other bad and disease and things that happen to reefs, but sometimes boat strikes hit our reefs too. So this is something that happened on St. John a few years ago, where this boat grounded and hit some critically endangered species. So this is an elkhorn coral, and you can see it smashed up little pieces of it. So it's really important to show what's happening down there, and then our team will go back and take these broken pieces and then attach them back onto the reef somewhere to help them replenish. And then also bleaching. So you guys have probably read about forest fires, and forest fires are kind of hard to ignore, right? Because they're right in our faces. I like to think of bleaching as our underwater forest fire, because it can be happening throughout an entire reef, right? But you could be swimming at the beach right next to it, but if you don't put a mask on or a scuba, you'll have no idea that this is happening. And it's basically an underwater forest fire, so think of it that way, because it can wipe out entire areas. You got a question, Hazel? Yes, they are sick, but if temperatures cool down, so we're just now starting to get into cooler water for the year, and so hopefully some of the bleached corals that are out there now will start to recover. But some of them, unfortunately, will not, but we'll just have to wait and see. So this is the last slide I have, but really, again, I just want to highlight the researchers are the ones who, the ones really making this happen, and it's a huge team effort to get this work done of helping to restore our reefs. And my job is I just really want to show people, and explain why this is important and show what's happening in your backyards and just out of sight. So next up we've got Sonora to talk about some super cool deep diving adventures. Cool, thanks.
Take for a coral to recuperate on its own from bleaching?
It can vary. I mean, apparently you have exact answer
years?
for that, but
so visually it'll look healthy again after a month or two. But what we know is it just went through an incredibly stressful state. So the following year it usually doesn't reproduce. So what we think is happening is it can take a year or more for it to regain its strength. So if you think about it, it's basically like somebody who doesn't have access to food for a couple of months. So they're near starving to death. It takes a while to recover from that. So for the corals, it's very similar. They take even longer. So visually they might look fine, but they were really stressed out.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Sonora, and today I'm going to talk about our project called Deep Outplanting. So we talked about bleaching a lot today, and this was kind of one of our responses to bleaching. We've looked at the nurseries where we grow a lot of our corals, and all of those are in really shallow water. And shallow water heats up a lot more than deeper water because it's got a lot of sun. So we put a lot of time and effort into caring for these corals. And last year, the water warmed up higher than was ever recorded in history. It was the warmest year ever. So we knew that these corals were going to bleach. We've been taking care of these corals for so long, we didn't want them to die. And we had a pretty good feeling that they were going to die. So we obviously can't make the water cooler, right? But what we can do is we can take them from that shallow water and move them deep where the water's a little bit colder, so hopefully that they can make it through that really hot summer. So this is a really cool picture that Dan took of me and my guide buddy Jason. This is where we're outplanting the staghorn coral. So these are the ones that we have in our nurseries primarily. So it's kind of like an evacuation. We just took everything and moved it down super deep, hoping that they could make it. What's really cool about this picture is you can see the other corals on this reef are already bleaching because it's super warm. So what we found so far is that the corals that we left shallow did bleach and die like we expected, but these ones that we've moved deep, remember the water's a little bit cooler and not so bright, not so stressful, they actually didn't bleach and they actually made it through the bleaching event. And we actually went and checked on them yesterday. And a decent amount of them are still alive, so it worked. Another really cool component about this project is the technology we're using to do this. So this reef is super deep. This reef here is at 120 feet under the ocean. So that's really hard to get to. Even on scuba, we don't have a lot of time to work there. So what we do is we use these things. These are called closed circuit rebreathers. So normal scuba, usually whenever you exhale, all the bubbles come out and you lose all of that gas. But what's cool about this is you rebreathe your breath. So you're kind of breathing in and out of a bag. And we breathe in oxygen, right? And we exhale CO2. So what happens is it takes the CO2 out of your exhale so that you can breathe it in again. So with this, you can see the tanks that we use on this are super tiny, right? They're like the size of a water bottle. But I can dive on this tank for about 6 hours because you're rebreathing your breath, which is super cool. And to our knowledge, we're the only restoration organization in the world using this technology. Next slide. This picture is also me, not on my rebreather. On normal scuba, you can see my bubbles. But this is in Krum Bay. So this is a project that Dan sort of started talking about where we found not we found, but there were a bunch of sunken ships, and they were sunk here for so long that coral started to grow on them. So they're down there for years and years, because remember, like Marilyn said, the corals grow really slow. And Kitty, who we'll talk about this project next, actually got a grant to remove all of these ships from the water. But we didn't want to kill all those corals, right? Because once you take them out of the water, they're going to die. So this was a really fun project where we got to go and dive on all of these sunken ships and take the corals off. And then we actually outplanted them. So a lot of the corals we found on these ships now live in the whole bay. This is a submarine. It used to be a tourist submarine you could go on and go underwater and go around in. And whenever, I don't remember why that company dissolved, but they just sunk the submarine in Krum Bay and said, not our problem anymore.
So if you're not familiar with Krum Bay, that's where Wapa is. So.
Yeah, so on the south side of St. Thomas, across the water island.
Yeah. You see the fire.
And does anyone recognize this thing? The toilet. A lot of the ships that were down there had toilets on them, so Dan has a lot of pictures of us with toilets underwater.
Old theories, that's next year.
Underwater toilets.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kitty Edwards, and I am not part of this amazing team. Friends with this amazing team. I work for the Department of Planning and Natural Resources, which is part of our local government. I am personally the Director of Territorial Parks and Protected Areas. However, this project goes back many years in my career to when I was the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Division of Coastal Zone Management. I would also like to say that this project probably constitutes for a lot of blood, sweat, and tears because it was a very long time to get this work done. So, you guys have heard from everyone who's spoken before, Marilyn, Dan, and Sonora, all mentioned that sometimes the coral grows on these reefs underwater. Sometimes it's an instant strike where a boat crashes into a reef and you see that damage immediately. But sometimes you have vessels that are abandoned. So this is a actually drone photograph that Dan took when we were almost done with this portion of the project. These vessels have been abandoned in Krum Bay since the 1980s. So in that amount of time, a lot of coral grew on them. I have no idea how many slides I have. Okay, perfect. Okay, so actually we can go back to the last one for just a few seconds. So you can see here, this was after we had spent about a year and approximately $2.9 million getting these vessels out of Krum Bay. But if we rewind in our minds to earlier back, I knew that I had this money to get the vessels out, and I was like, this is really dirty water. This is a kind of shady area, literally, and just lots of trash. And so I was curious what's going on underwater. And my partner is actually one of the team members, Jason, who is in many of these photos. And I said, hey, you want to go snorkel Krum Bay? And he said, yes. I said, great, I'm going to watch from the surface. And so he and some of the team members went snorkeling and found on all these vessels, and actually originally when we started this project, they went all the way down to here. So this was all filled with giant barges. And they found a lot of really beautiful coral that was really surprising. So now we can go to the next one, because there's actually a picture. This is Jason diving on a tugboat that was found. And I don't know what kind of coral that is.
Brain coral.
Brain coral. So they found a lot of coral. I was waiting for all this amazing government stuff that I have to do, contracts, permits, all of this. And while we were waiting, I knew that when we finally got to remove these vessels, if you run into an endangered species, your project stops, you have to pay somebody to go in and move that species before work can continue. And so, while I knew we had about 6 months before the contractors would make it on island, I said, let's find a project that's already happening. And so Marilyn and her team had existing permits to move fragments of opportunity and to do coral relocation. And so we took advantage of existing funding, existing permits, existing resources, and the divers went out. I don't know how many times you guys ended up in the water in different teams. A lot. And they removed over 1,000 corals from these vessels. We didn't know exactly when the work was going to start, and so we started high priority endangered species like listed, and then as the months wore on and I was still getting contracts negotiated, they were able to remove all these corals. And it's a really beautiful story, I think, because I was able to take advantage of delays in government work, which you guys may be shocked that sometimes government work is delayed. But working between the government project of removing these vessels and an existing project, and then being so lucky as to have Dan on the team taking these photographs, it has made a really cool story, kind of like a full circle moment. I ran out of money, and so that picture of all the vessels, the scrap was removed, but I ran out of money and wasn't able to remove the rest of the vessels. But the work continues. We'll try another way. But in the meantime, we have these photographs, documentation of all the work that happened, and we got to save those corals. So it was really fun. Thanks, guys. I'm so sorry, I don't have a prop. I feel so unprepared.
Good afternoon, everyone. Does anyone have any idea what this is?
A ghost.
Oh, I heard a few interesting answers. Let me start with this side first before I get to the one over there. What did you say? A net? Okay, yeah. And what did you say?
I think it looks like a ghost decoration.
A ghost decoration. Okay. Yes, it is a net. Let's get past that one for now. But yeah, so this is a net. And we often use this whenever we're trying to do certain types of research, depending on what we're trying to do. And this is an example of how we use that net. So I remember this day very clearly. It was towards the evening time, and I remember it was kind of cold and stuff like that, and we had to go scuba diving because there was something going on in this coral spawning. I've never done coral spawning before, and I've never used a net before. But it turns out it was actually quite easy. So essentially what you're going to be doing is just going scuba diving. You find the coral, and then you're going to want to take this net. And you're going to want to make sure you put these little weights around the coral head, making sure that you don't drop this on the coral itself. Because if you were to drop this on the coral, you're going to damage the coral. And the coral is actually made out of a skeleton. So I don't think any of you would like if that weight just dropped on your toe or dropped on you, along with the coral. You know what it is? So you should be up here with me speaking. Yeah? So what he said basically was that this net is used to capture the corals when they release their gametes, or that's their sperm and egg, into the water. And the way that comes out is kind of like a ball. So, see that ball? So when you're thinking about the gametes and what they're going to be like, you can imagine this ball, but imagine it smaller than your pinky fingernail. And not you guys, because you guys are pretty big and pretty old, but smaller than maybe his fingernail too. And so that's like maybe half of that size. Thank you. And so when we're releasing that gamete, we have to make sure that we have a type of bottle that will be able to capture that. So you can go on to the next slide. And you see that's exactly what I was talking about. There's a bunch of those little balls. And so we have to make sure that we have teams of people all around the reef and Brewers Bay. And they have nets all around a bunch of different corals. And so they're trying to capture those little balls that is being released into the water. And so, like Liam said, what happens is the corals will release their gametes from their polyps. And if you want to think about a polyp, you can kind of think about it as like, well, we have a bunch of images of polyps all around us. But you can also think about a polyp as like a mouth with tentacles. And so in the base of those tentacles is the mouth itself. And so the mouth opens up and it releases that ball. That ball is then released from within the coral, and then it travels up the net, gets captured within the top funnel part of the net, and goes into the container. Then after, you simply just gotta seal that off and pass it on to the next person so that they can go and try to do some sort of work with it. Typically, we have nurseries on land at UBI, and we try to grow the corals in there. And so that's kind of what we're going on. That's kind of what we have going on when we're trying to do this type of work. And it's one of our ways that we're trying to combat the fact that corals are declining globally. But it's especially noticeable here in the Virgin Islands. We're an economy that's really dependent on forests. We have a lot of people that come down from the States and they want to enjoy the beautiful beaches. They want to see the marine life. And if we don't have corals, then where's the marine life going to live? The corals are basically, like Marilyn said, they're like the homes, the shelters, and stuff like that. There are a lot of the fish and the animals like to live there. And if we don't have those corals, then we don't have the fish life. And if we don't have the fish life, then we lose our main source of revenue for the Virgin Islands. Right? And I think that's it for me.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel. So this is the land-based version of what Nicholas was just talking about. So corals normally spawn at night, and we have to use red light. So I know a lot of you guys have seen before with turtles, when the babies hatch, you use red lights because it doesn't distract the turtles. So same thing, we need to use red lights when we're doing the spawning process on land. So here on land, we just keep watching until we actually see something happen, and instead of using nets, we use cups, and we use pipettes, and we collect them, and we start the process from there. So since corals are live and they're animals, they do rely on certain cues like the moon, the annual temperature cycles of the water, but it's not 100% certain when this happens. So we usually end up doing this when we're outside watching corals for a few days, almost a week long, until we actually get some spawning from the corals. So this is kind of the night shift, I guess we'd say, for doing some coral stuff. Luckily, this year, when we did this, we did have spawning, and we had some babies, and it was really cool, and it was really exciting. Move on to the next slide. Thank you. So, can anyone tell me what you think this is? Right, but like what kind of coral do you think it is? Yes, it is a brain coral. It's actually specifically called the grooved brain coral, because you can see in here it looks like grooves. So these are corals, like we talked before, we hammered and chiseled and brought them in on land, we take care of them, and they're almost like pets. So what do you guys think you have to do to care for a pet? Like what's one of the main things you do to care for them? Yes, we feed our corals. So while, like Marilyn said, they have the little algae in them, corals can also eat from the environment. So we make them protein shakes 3 times a week, and we feed them, and they get nice and big and strong. And then they have the energy to be able to do this, so they can do. Yes, question. I'm sorry. How do you feed it? Good question. So what we do is we buy, so normally corals grab little tiny phytoplankton and other algae from the water. So we buy a powder that's the phytoplankton that's been dried and ground into a powder. We put that in, it looks just like a ketchup bottle, that's actually what it is. We put it in a ketchup bottle, and then we add some amino acids and some salt water and shake it up. So we're literally making a protein shake for them. And then we take that bottle and we squeeze it right over the coral gently, and then it is able to take it and eat it. On occasion too, we actually have some dried shrimp that are about this big, and with tweezers, the ones that have the nice long tentacles, like these, if you hold the shrimp right over it, the tentacle's actually going to grab it from you. So it's really cool, so you can feed them in those ways. So, do you guys know what this is? This round thing here? No. It is a snail. Why do you guys think we would have a snail in our tanks? I'm sorry. No, I think you said the right thing. I just couldn't hear you. So they eat, yes, they eat the algae. So this snail is here eating some of this algae. So we use the snails as some of our live-in helpers. And they do, so this tank is nice and white, nice, beautiful, clean. It doesn't stay like that for long. So we use these snails to help us clean the raceways, to help eat algae, so they're really, really helpful. Since these snails are eating a lot, they also poo a lot, so then we have to go in and clean them. So we use what's called a siphon. It's basically an underwater vacuum, and we vacuum these just like you would when you're taking care of a pet at home. And then, let's see, do any of you guys snorkel at all? No? You guys do? Well, no worries. If you want to still be involved in coral science, marine biology, this is all on land. No snorkeling required at all. So, like Marilyn said, especially when you guys are in undergrad, if you go here to the university, we do take undergrad interns. So if you guys want to get involved, dip your toes in, not actually, you can come and volunteer with us and learn what it's like to take care of corals on land, if you want to. And then, does anyone have any questions? Okay, I think that's it for me.
All the presentations we have, if you guys want to come in like a similar gear or anything, feel free.
I do have one question.
Yeah, or if there's questions.
Yeah, Sonora. That first image of you, when you're moving the coral to cooler water, what is it attached to on the coral you're moving it from? Like, and how easy is that process?
Yeah. So these corals, for that version of the project, we took actually from our nurseries. So over here, this photo set, we have these big PVC, we call them trees, that we have in the water, and we hang the corals from fishing lines.
In a deeper.
So that's how they live shallow.
Oh, okay.
So we just cut them off the trees with scissors.
Okay.
And then we take them, and then they're not attached to anything. We cut the fishing line off. And then we go to the reef and clean off the algae and the sand, put a little cement, and then you put the coral there. The cement will harden, and then after like 2 weeks, the corals actually grow on the reef and attach themselves.
So that photo was the deep photo.
Yeah.
Got you. Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
So that's us actually putting it onto the reef.
Thank you.
So we have these big baskets. I don't know if we have pictures of us with baskets, but they're just like laundry baskets that you would use at home. You put all the corals in there and swim down holding the laundry basket full of corals.
And how did that stay down? Like when I saw that photo, I was like, how is it not floating?
We tie weights
Is
to
the
them.
coral on the just on the
Outside.
edge
On
of
the
it?
basket,
I was
yeah.
like, this is weird.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
That's a good point though. Things floating is a big problem for us.
Such a big problem.
Especially if you're super deep, because if it floats, it's gone.
It's gone.
You can't go up and grab it again, so it's gone forever.
Things that people who restore trees don't have to worry about. Yeah, we have to worry about buoyancy, running out of air, all of those things. So it is challenging. But I did want to make a point that when I meet the team slide, there are asterisks next to everybody who's graduated from UBI, which is pretty much the majority of our team. So this is really a homegrown staff here at UBI. Any other questions? No? All right, well, ask questions or go check out our stuff, please. Especially the readers are going to be very cool. So thank you all for coming, and feel free to reach out to us. I think you can always scan this QR code to get to our Linktree site, which has videos and all sorts of stuff. We have stickers if you'd like some. If you want to buy a shirt or a hat, please feel free. Everything goes straight to Reef Response.
I didn't want to add something.
Can they get one more round of applause, please? One more. They're amazing. I do want to add that this exhibit is going to be here until the end of next month. They aren't just pretty pictures though. Dan has agreed that when they sell, Reef Response and the VI Children's Museum gets a percentage of those sales. So if you know anyone into photography, on island, off island, they can come in, they can purchase. They're not purchasing that thing, so he reprints. Yeah, he reprints it. You're not taking this home. But we also have an online gallery of all this art on the VI Children's Museum website. So please go check it out. If you know anyone off island and they miss home and they want, well, maybe you don't want like a bleached coral photo, but still, they're beautiful images. So VIChildren'smuseum.org is our website, and hashtag Dan Mele is the page for this stuff, okay? Thank you guys so much.
Anything else for anybody else?
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thank you. This is awesome. Thank you.
At least get a free sticker.
Oh, I'm getting a sticker. Thank you. I gotta replace the one on my phone. Look, it's all like that. I gotta